Okay, so before we launch into this hyperspace, let's get grounded in some basics. The core foundation of the gene keys is called the spectrum of consciousness. It's made up of 64 codes, and these are the 64 gene keys. And each gene key is divided up into 3 levels called frequency bands. And these bands are called the shadow, the gift, and the siddhi. And if you look down the shadow frequency band, you can see that they're all human states that cause misery and suffering, conflict, corruption, unease, stress, intolerance, and so on. These are the psychological victim patterns that catch us in their claws and can literally hijack an entire life. These shadow states are fear states. They're part of the ancient reptilian programming from the older parts of our brain. But we have a choice about how we use those parts of our brain and whether we use them or not. So fear is actually a choice. That's an important revelation. The other important revelation is that these states are frequency bands. So like a radio set, we attune ourselves to them. And if, for example, you watch the news on TV every day and you believe that that is all the world is, then you are programming deep into your being, into your DNA, a worldview that is pretty much based on fear. That's something to consider. And the next level in the spectrum, however, is called the gift frequency. And this is quite beautiful because it's about our genius. And our genius only comes alive when we're willing to confront the shadows. And then those shadows, like butterflies emerging from caterpillars, they transform into our gifts. It's like that cliche, every cloud has a silver lining. Every shadow contains a gift. And maybe that's why there are so few true geniuses in the world, because genius lies in the last place you would ever think to look. It lies in the heart of your actual suffering. So you have to embrace your shadow. Like in the ancient myths, you have to go down into the underworld and free yourself of these old patterns, these fear patterns, and these limiting beliefs. And when you do that, you release a huge amount of energy and enthusiasm, and you literally change your body, your chemistry, and your whole being. You fill again with vitality, and you stop feeling so tired and so drained, and you become creative and open and optimistic once again, as you did when you were a young child. So we have the shadow, which can be unlocked through deep acceptance and deep self-compassion, and that transforms it into our creative genius. That's the gift frequency, shadow to gift. So when you look into the spectrum, this table, you'll see all the gifts. These are the human archetypes, types of latent genius waiting to be unlocked. The genius of commitment, the genius of detachment, the genius of revolution, the genius of altruism. This is like a directory of all human genius. And those are just words, but behind them lie whole worlds. And you're somewhere in there too. More of that later. And you might think that that was enough. For most people working with the gene keys, it's just that, to transform our challenges into opportunities for transformation and for joy. And by the way, when you look into each gene key, you'll see how this works. So for instance, if you take the 12th gene key, you'll see that the shadow is called vanity, the shadow of vanity. That's human narcissism. That's our tendency to behave as though we're the center of the universe. And then you'll see that the gift here is discrimination. So as we learn to see through our own vanity, through our own self-obsession, so we learn to use that insight to help others, and we become more discriminating. And then the highest aspect here, that's what I call the siddhi, it's purity. That's the pure heart. So all deep down inside all of us, we all have the same pure heart. But it's only through the journey of discrimination that we get to reach and realize that inner purity. And of course, you can see all along the connection between vanity and purity at the two ends of the spectrum. So it isn't really a spectrum at all. The purity is hidden within the vanity. The shadow contains the gift and the siddhi. This is the higher hidden potential and purpose of our suffering, to take us all the way up to our highest potential. So it's all a matter really of leaps in consciousness. You know, the shadow to the gift, that's a great leap in consciousness. You know, someone living in their shadows, that's a person who doesn't really believe that anything is possible. Their life seems like a dead-end street. They feel trapped, tired, ground down by the relentless struggle of the mundane life. You know, their relationships and the futile search for stability and wealth and health and, you know, we know the story. But someone living out their gifts, that's completely different. You know, this is a person who's creative, who's self-empowered, who's humble, who's joyous, who's integrated. You know, they're pretty amazing. And life can't get them down for too long. You know, they're human as well. You know, but they're strong in their vulnerability. They're a hub of transformation. They suffer like everyone else. But they don't allow their suffering to get the best of them. They use it as fuel to live their life at a higher level, to create opportunities where before there were only problems. And then, of course, there is one more level. There's one more leap, and that's the icing on the cake. You know, the icing is what this program is all about. That's a pun, by the way, the icing. The icing is the same as the I Ching, the icing. Anyway, sorry, couldn't resist. The icing is the final level of consciousness, which I call the siddhi. And siddhi is a Sanskrit word. I had to turn to Sanskrit because there was no word in English. And the word siddhi means more or less divine gift or kind of superpower. And you know that game, you know, where you with your child or a young child or anyone, and you ask each other, you know, if you could have any superpower, what would yours be? You know, and that's what this is. That's what the siddhis are. It's your superpower. You know, vanity becomes purity. And there's always a relationship between the shadow and the siddhi, between what gets you down the most and your very highest potential. And these siddhis, these are not just states. They can be stabilized into permanent stages of consciousness. They're fields of frequency. And there are 64 of these fields, these siddhis. And they're really all one field, but with different variations, different manifestations of one vast, pervasive truth. And these 64 are all the states of consciousness available to human beings. They're the latent potential hidden in the coding of our DNA, but requiring a high frequency code to unlock them. You know, this is the unlimited you. This is your higher self, your divinity, your greatest purpose in life. You know, and what's the code? What is the code that unlocks such rarefied states? And how do we activate it? Of course, that's the golden question. And before I get into that, I want to invite each of you to take some time with this spectrum of consciousness. Maybe you can print it out and you can contemplate it and spend some time looking at the states of consciousness. Maybe some of those words will jump out at you. Maybe some of those shadows seem familiar as well. You know, the gene keys are a journey into these codes, and I recommend spending some time considering the siddhis, those extraordinary words that indicate higher states of consciousness, and open your mind up to the possibility that those are states that you yourself can attain. Just open yourself up. That's all that's required. And by the way, as an aside, when I was first naming these this spectrum, these siddhis, I was in something of an expanded state, and for some reason I put into my Google search engine 64 siddhis, and it was extraordinary to me to find that there actually is a whole tradition of this from the ancient Vedas in India, the wisdom teachings of India. You know, there's a verse in the original text of the Vedas that speaks specifically of the 64 siddhis. That really blew me away, you know. But further elucidation is not given in the Vedas as to what they really are. And I'll speak more about that in a moment. For those of you who are new to the Gene Keys, the Gene Keys also comes with a profiling system, and it's called your hologenetic profile. And you can get that profile for free on the genekeys.com website. And your profile shows you the specific gene keys which relate to the areas of your life. So we each have specific keys out of the total of 64, which dictate various themes and stages in our life. So there are gene keys that release prosperity, gene keys that ensure good health, gene keys that open our heart and heal our relationships. You know, this whole wisdom is a journey. It's an adventure into the inner world that your outer world is created out of. So if you want to change your outer world, you first of all have to change the inside. That's what this is all about. And you may come to see, by the way, that the desire to change your outer world is actually the one thing that is most in the way. But that's another story we'll get to. So in this 4-part program, I'll be diving into the 64 cities, these extraordinary states of consciousness, these words that seem far away from your everyday life, but in fact they are closer than we realize. It may take a bit of work to get there, but we each have a route into this higher wisdom inside us. The route for each of us is completely different. And the gene keys give you your specific codes, your routes into the higher consciousness. And in this sense, the gene keys are very unique. You know, there may not have been a knowledge like this for some time in the world, an encyclopedia of enlightenment. You know, a highly specific guide to the self-realized state. You know, it's a pathway of love and of wisdom and of truth. And it's timeless and it's ancient. But above all, it's simple and it's practical and it's alive. You know, this wisdom, it's actually alive within us. It's not a book or a system. It's not in these words. It's behind all that. It's in us. It's in us all. It's in us right now as you hear this or you read this. It's immediate. It's now. It's available. You just have to knock on the door in the right way. And that's what this program is about.